right. So in this episode, we're very excited to be welcoming Ridzki Kramadibrata, who is the former CEO and president of Grab Indonesia with a long career in the private sector and within Southeast Asia more broadly. I really wanted to invite Ridzki to this podcast because Ridzki is, for me, an example of an entrepreneur and a human being who is truly mission-driven, who exemplifies decision-making that is deeply anchored in a sense of purpose. And I think growing businesses in global growth markets and growing a business in a country like Indonesia can be extremely difficult. And he makes it seem easy and will demonstrate the kind of values and deep thinking that is required in building a venture in a global growth market. And I hope that all of you will enjoy the conversation that I will have with him and learn as much from him as I have over the years. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that you leave feeling inspired and hopeful. Okay, so excited to welcome you, Ridzki Kramadibrata, to our podcast. You and I have, our relationship has been built now over a span of since COVID started, starting with my dear friend Tirza. When I met her in DC and she said, Dina, Grab has been doing really amazing things in Indonesia. And I said, well, we need to capture that at the Legatum Center. And she connected me to you. And that was the beginning of our journey. I want to ask you a very personal question to start us off, because aside from Grab and your amazing success, not just as an entrepreneur, but someone who is in a big corporate, and you spent your life working in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, you have a very unique leadership style. And you have a very unique way of showing up for your team, and I've seen it live. What does leadership mean to you?
Okay, thank you, Dina. Before I get to that questions, the pleasure is mine, definitely. You're right. It started a few years ago during COVID. I can't believe that I'm here podcasting with you.
I know. I can't believe it either.
IT, it's just right beside the main street in Cambridge. So it's wonderful weather as well today. So yes, it's been an amazing journey. I think I've been too fortunate, in my opinion, in all of this. But yes, leadership plays a little bit part of it, to my opinion. To me, as a leader, you have to lead the way and show the way. I mean, like you hear about that. But I think it's much more complicated than how it's formulated in a sentence. You need to gather information. You need to digest it. You need to find just as well how things will lead, the business, the innovations, the team to something that is meaningful to them. So that's kind of like building a purpose to them. Of course, I'm a man that is believing so much about team building, teamwork, how talents play a really, really important part in, achieving your goals. So definitely in the process, it's not just me, leading people ways. It's actually a process of, discussions, accumulating information, but most importantly, to get a conclusions of where are we heading to. And then once you actually formulate it, you can't believe people will really, really follow and will really, really, believe in and do whatever it takes to achieve it.
I think sometimes being in a position of authority is really difficult. I think it's easy when we know the solutions, right? Sometimes decision-making is easy. It's a problem, we know the solution, and you can just execute. But sometimes when you're hit with a pandemic, with a company that's still in the kind of middle of its journey, like when you were CEO of Grab Indonesia, we really don't know what we're supposed to do. And when I speak to my Foundry Fellows here at the Legatum Center, I always say, there's no such thing as a leader. There's something called leadership. And we need leadership when we really don't know the answer. That's when we need leadership the most, right? So when the pandemic hit and nobody really had a clue what to do in Indonesia, and you were faced with this decision. You were at the time, Grab was really just mainly a ride hailing app, and obviously no one would want to get in a car or get on the back of a motorcycle in the face of a pandemic. But for sure, you didn't really know what to do, and you had to really spend time with your team, mobilize them. What did that time look like for you as Ridzki? What was really going through your mind, and how were you dealing with this very difficult process of decision making at a time where nobody had any answers and everyone was really shooting in the dark?
Interesting questions. But first of all, I beg to differ on your first statement. Over my course of career over decades, there has never been any easy decisions. Decisions always difficult and tough because you always see the plus side, the downsides, the upsides of decisions. You have opposing people. You have people that supporting decisions. So leaders' job is to assess all of those aspects and taking some risk out of it because there will be implications to your decisions making, and then it is actually very important to involve more people in the decision making. It's there's also a reason why it's called leadership because it's not single person. It's actually a group
Group.
of people to decide. And then of course within that group of people you will see different opinions as well. And then maybe in certain points it takes a leader to make a hard decision, hard choice.
How do you create a space to allow for all these different opinions to exist at the same time?
It's a culture, I guess. I think we need to build the culture where people could speak up their minds. I think in the Western world, maybe it is much a common practice to do that, but maybe in the Eastern part of the world, it's not such a common practice.
Yeah.
So you have to encourage people in the beginning, just to be honest with you.
Yeah.
People are not automatically built in the Eastern part of the world to
Speak up.
speak up.
Or to speak up to somebody with a title of CEO.
Exactly. It takes some encouragement to do that.
Yeah.
But once you show that it's not only allowed, but you are welcome to do that, then people will start to actually to say their minds. And leadership's then built. Now, coming back to your second questions, pandemic. I'm glad it's actually,
Behind us?
behind us already.
For now.
For now.
We don't know what's going to hit us next.
Now we know that, unpredictable things are, probably, ahead of us. But yes, pandemic is one of the example where it was an extremely difficult positions. I talked a little bit about, how leader lead the way by, gathering all the informations. And try to digest it to be able to formulate it to something that you could do. But during the pandemic, there's little information to no information. I think the whole world didn't know what to do as well. Not just me, not just, the team.
But some people just dove right in and just started, doing what they thought was best without really having the time to really think through. You didn't do that.
We didn't do that. I mean, like, I remember that one of the first questions we had was that, how long this will last? I still remember there are some, people taking a wild guess that, this will be over in about 3 months, 6 months.
Oh, I had somebody say, this will be done in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah, and we all know how long that it lasted, right? So during that uncertainty periods, it is an importance of regrouping and then set your priorities. And during my role at that time, of course, the priorities, and you can hear it, is what is at stakes the most are the micro entrepreneurs that within the platforms. These are the drivers, the merchants that suddenly seeing their business, changed significantly and impacts their lives, not only their lives, but also their families. So it's an easy, thought process. We focused on them and see what we could do to them. And of course, there's a process in between. I talk about, how I involve team. We talk to the team, what do they think, and then we try to structure it as well, but focusing on these micro entrepreneurs. And then we see that pivoting the business is one good way to do it. still using the much of the resources that we have accumulated in terms of technology, in terms of services, but pivoting toward how we could actually serve their business, these micro entrepreneurs, better. And then, of course, deliveries in the case of Southeast Asia has played the best. I think we partly changed how people behaviors took place during the pandemic, and it enables also to help governments in terms of logistics, because during the pandemic, logistics, especially the last mile, was one of the most difficult things. But with the help of
Yeah.
these micro entrepreneurs, we could reach the areas where it was very unlikely
Very
for the
unlikely
governments
to
to actually to tap into.
So you use your platform to get services to people.
Mm-hmm.
But it really needed a mindset shift. You had to kind of reframe
Mm-hmm.
your offering, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was less about getting someone from point A to point B,
Mm-hmm.
and it became the reverse.
Exactly.
How do you get the point B to the person at point A?
Exactly.
But that required a lot of new learning and a lot of creativity. That was really where innovation was happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, like if I like the way you put it, point A to point B, and then point B. Now it's actually point B to point A. Um, many great ideas in the world. It's just a simple concept, and concept like that works really, really well in the time where it's needed the most. And the momentum was right. The pre-works was there, and then suddenly the change of the mindset helped everyone to solve majority of the problems.
And then you kept purpose at the very core, because
Yeah.
what was really keeping you up at night was making sure that all the people that you had provided income for were not going to lose their income.
Okay, you wouldn't believe how much these things kept me at night.
I do believe it, because I know you as a person. I can
Yes.
imagine that you were deeply concerned about all the people who'd be potentially losing access to income.
Yeah, but on the positive side as well, it is also not only kept me wake up at night, but also, I mean, like this kind of things where you're so purpose driven, mission driven, and you're impacting so many lives, so many people's economies. You wake up so energized as well.
Yeah.
Thinking about the positive impact that you're making, you and the team,
Yeah.
and then what kind of new things that you will do
To make a difference.
to make a difference.
Yeah.
And then this is really an amazing part of it.
I totally get it and can imagine. So I'm going to ask you a question a little bit about failure now.
Oh.
Because, when we decide to engage in any form of leadership, all throughout your career, for sure there were failures. But a good mentor of mine always said, failure is only failure if you haven't learned the lessons that you need to learn. But over the span of your career, if there is one leadership failure that you can remember that impacted you, what was it? And are you willing to share?
Yeah, so I think failures is an interesting subject because at one point,
Especially in our cultures,
exactly,
because failure is not always allowed.
people blame for failures. So I think, if you're so irresponsible in taking decision and make failures, maybe there's reasons where people actually blame on you, and then the culture's probably built on that because our cultures maybe in the past was not so much about structuring issues and then addressing it constructively, and then where it's actually built the cultures that people why did you do such things, but if you do it in a responsible way and structure it, you've done as much as possible to avoid the failures. And when failures happen, then people understand it's actually beyond the control, and it's the structures that you need to help build to make the organizations make failures
Okay.
okay, because otherwise you don't make foolish mistakes,
And you don't get creative.
then you don't get creative. So you actually have to allow a set of values to actually to enable for the organizations to become more agile and yet creative and innovative as well. Well, in the past, I've had as you can guess, probably, I mean, like I one of the leaders' job is to take risk, and I told you earlier that there has never been easy decisions.
No.
I've met, several mistakes, to be honest with you. I mean, like I've done, telco businesses, airlines, and then now platform businesses. In airlines, I could, confess that there's so many, routes mistakes that I did as well. And it actually affects the, not only the company, but how people will use the airlines.
Sure.
And in the
And airlines are a tricky business, right?
tricky
Because
business, exactly.
so much safety involved.
So much safety. You have to actually to prioritize safety, but yet you're Indian is a business. You have to actually to self-sustain your own ventures as well. And in platform business, I think there's few mistakes that I've made as well. I mean, like we're so creative. We're creating so many verticals, services that sounds really, really, exciting in the beginning, but it didn't take up in the market. So, I mean, like mistakes like this happen and we just assume it. As long as you're very responsible in the process, then it's our common, it's our risk actually to take and no one's to blame.
But how did you, I'm going to try to get you to open up a bit. How did you feel at those moments of failure?
It is number one, if it's depends on the impact of the failures. Definitely.
Yeah, because failure can impact us a lot as humans, right? Because
Exactly.
we hold ourselves, especially you, I know you, to very high standards. And when you do go through a failure, there's a lot of emotions that come to the forefront. How do you deal with those multitude of emotions that come with a failure until you learn what you need to learn from it?
Yes. So if it's number one, there's no use for you to regret what has happened.
Yeah.
Of course, you learn from the mistake, but you don't regret because regretting is just taking you nowhere.
No.
I think the key things here is to quickly learn from the mistakes. I like the quick debrief, things. When you face something, you make mistakes, your team make mistakes, I make mistakes. We do quick debriefing. And then because the momentum was there.
And then you can learn.
You can learn, as effective as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You take more time to do debriefing and understanding what mistakes that you have made. It becomes more irrelevant and you tend to forget, few details that is actually very, very important. So the key things is to quickly learn from it and have the team to debrief together with you. So many mistakes we've made. Sometimes the impact was not only to to the company, to the stakeholders, but sometimes there's personal, impact as well.
Absolutely.
Yep. So
I think that's the most difficult part of it sometimes.
Yep. So I've had a share of mistakes that I've made that, had some implications to my family. And then I had to definitely quickly reviewing it and learning from it, and as much as possible not to repeat it. And the best is actually to get better out of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's only one way, and that's forward. But you have to make peace with some of the things that happened in our past, right?
I like that. I've had this someone telling me a tragedy plus time, it's comedy. You look at some of your past mistakes, past tragedy, that as it's actually a pass over time, it becomes a little bit, you tend to laugh at it.
Oh, I don't know about that for me. Maybe in Indonesia you can find humor, but I don't know. Egyptians aren't so much the same.
So yes, don't be too.
Don't take yourself too seriously. Maybe
seriously. You learn quickly, you learn fast, and recover from it, and gets better off of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanna take us a little bit into. So here at the Legatum Center, we think about entrepreneurship and innovation as a means and not an end. So we don't. For us, it's not just about seeing more and more entrepreneurs. It's really more about what entrepreneurship can do for society. And so we talk a lot about entrepreneurship and innovation as a pathway to achieving sustainable prosperity, specifically within global growth markets. In countries like Indonesia, like yours, or Egypt, like mine, thinking about entrepreneurship and innovation as a strategic strategy for government to really create prosperity hasn't really been there.
Mm.
Oftentimes it happens by accident. It's not as intentional as one would hope, even though to create economic prosperity, you really want to see bottom up growth, and you
Mm.
need to see that through traditional entrepreneurship, and you need to see that through innovation driven entrepreneurship.
Mm.
I think you have witnessed live the power of entrepreneurship and innovation in creating prosperity in a country like Indonesia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so important for entrepreneurs today, specifically in markets like ours, to really understand that they have a big and critical role to play in achieving prosperity in their
Mm.
countries?
Yeah, I really believe that entrepreneurs is the core of the economy. I mean, like, where will economy go without all of these entrepreneurs? But entrepreneurs come in, there's a big, size companies, entrepreneurships, but there's also, small to medium
Small to medium
size.
size.
And I see the patterns in many countries. I thought it was Indonesia specific, but then I studied and learned it's actually quite common across countries that the dominant players and the dominant contributions comes actually from small and medium enterprises. The problem is, I think, lies from the whether the government allows the environment
For them to thrive,
for them not to only to thrive, but to
grow.
grow. And this is a typical problem in the growth market. So what is more important is for the governments to really, really think about how to embrace this business, how to give, platforms for them to grow, and how to create like ecosystem and environment where they could more than thrive, they could expand. Because in the end, there's so much that governments could do in terms of, subsidizing economy or, building,
Mm-hmm.
initiatives. You will need to actually for the country to really, really grow. You need to really make sure that these players really, really grow. So that's one side of the economy, the small and medium enterprises. But
And
also,
then there are the grabs of the world.
then there's the grabs of the world. And I think with the technology nowadays, the enablement of growth markets to play a better positions in terms of creating technologies and things, it's much more visible and easier. You know,
Well, you say that, but here in the United States, I'm not sure that your average person at MIT or Harvard would think, oh, Indonesia, now that's a country where innovation is happening.
yeah, I think that's kind of misperceptions
That's right.
that happening. A lot of things has changed and has been going on, I think, since the past decade. With the enablement of the new technology, people could create, innovations, technologies, even from home, and then of course scale with the help of course, investors, VCs, and rest to help grow to a sizable business. And this kind of revolutions, the tech revolutions happening in the growth market, including Indonesia's people, starting to create amazing innovations
Yeah.
and then doing things that was not possible in the past, but now it's so possible and
Yeah.
challenging the businesses from the established markets like in the US, Europe, of course, taking advantage from their own markets first. For Southeast Asia's case,
Yeah.
of course, Southeast Asia market. I know in Africa, Latin America, similar things happening. And I think that would be the misperceptions that happening right now. Many people in the developed market didn't think that the revolution is going so rapidly and so fast, but it is going that fast lately.
I have a good friend. His name is Christopher Schroeder. He spent a lot of time in the Middle East starting. He was really fascinated with this growth and evolution of tech startups in the Middle East, specifically post all of the uprisings that happened in 2011, to the extent that he actually wrote a book called Startup Rising. And he always says something. He says that within emerging markets or global growth markets, countries like Egypt or Indonesia or Nigeria, the the introduction of the smartphone was a game changer, because that gave access to your everyday person to technology that was extremely powerful. Do you find this to be true in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think it is true.
And without the smartphone, Grab wouldn't be able to be what it is.
Yeah, I think the the predictions in the past that saying like chipsets will be much smaller, much affordable, but yet faster. It has plays. It's finally plays a part to the growth market. But few things that was not people was not so paying attention in the 2 decades ago. That mobility, like you mentioned, I mean,
Yeah.
like mobile device now has become so easily so affordable. And then don't forget the existence of broadband right now
Yeah,
that
that's right.
has enabled many innovations that was not possible to be made in the past. Now with the existence of those very fast chipset in a mobile, and then broadband existed in growth market like Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia.
Oh, I actually think we were in a better position, right? Because when the mobile phone came into existence, Africa was able to leapfrog in terms of technology. We were much faster than the United States, even. And I think there's a lot of potential for global growth markets to leapfrog because we're not weighed down by old technology. We can immediately leapfrog and embrace new technology. I think the issue is do we have the will, the political will to do that sometimes?
I like the leapfrog terminology because it is what important.
Yeah.
And with the technology, I think the growth market has two advantages. Number one, the technology that enables them to leapfrog. But number two is also very important. A market of consumers that's so keen to adopt new things.
Yes.
You see how people adapt new technologies much easier in the growth market.
And there's such a need for services, right?
Exactly, because maybe in an established market like US, Europe, things has been established, and then people don't need any extra things. You go to your groceries, it's kind of like it's standard. But in Indonesia, for example, it's so different kind of quality if you go to the brick and mortars, and depends
or
on
a
your
remote area versus
areas as well.
Urban center.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with the existence of new technology, there's no difference. For examples, telemedicines, for examples. I mean, like it used to be in remote area. It's hard to access doctors. But with the existence of telemedicines, they could access the same quality of medical service to the ones that receive it in the metropolitan area. So the adoption level is different because people are so much in need of the same qualities.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask you a question about values.
Wow.
Because I know you think about values a lot. I know I think about values a lot. And you have to make a decision every day almost to stick by core values that we have learned. But when you're an entrepreneur in a rapidly changing market, sometimes your values are constantly being questioned. And sometimes you really have to think very hard about where your red line is. What line are you absolutely not willing to cross? And then sometimes your values are what really lead you to staying the course of making a difference in the face of all the different challenges that entrepreneurs face in markets like in Indonesia, or actually more broadly Southeast Asia, because they're all rapidly changing and growing markets. How important is it for entrepreneurs to really spend time thinking and understanding their values and what they stand for and what their red lines are?
So I think values is at the core of our initiatives. I think things like visions, cultures, you really need to think through it and believe in what's your path to it. And then this is another key things: bring in people, like-minded people,
Along.
with you along to actually to fight for it. Um, established market like U.S., Europe. I think values have been built for long. I think for centuries maybe, and then it's not that difficult, that hard for people to stick to their values because it's you're surrounded with people that already quite understand
I
of the
think regulatory environments in the United States ensure that certain values are upheld, right?
exactly, and then it has built in the cultures, and the people already automatically know that it is there. But in the growth markets, you tend to kind of like open the way. You're fighting not only for your cause, but it's also for you know
Setting an example
setting an example
for
because
the
you
generations to
you will be
come.
surprised. There's actually many people thriving to fight the same values. And then by showing examples and then by showing it to the world that you could do it, then same like-minded people, even though maybe not in the same organizations as you are, but looking at you that you were actually
They're seeing how
successful,
you behave.
we behave
I
and
remember
successful.
last year, some of the students who met you here on campus, they came to me, they said, Pa Ridzki is a legend in Indonesia because he stands for certain values.
Mm.
That's also a heavy burden.
It is. But I think it is part when you actually do it on a mission that you're so aware that there are so many people there looking for an examples that you could be successful by stand up to your values. Then you're kind of like planting seeds. Then you will see soon people, starting to, showing the world as well. Then you suddenly realize that you're not so alone.
Yeah.
You actually have companies.
Yeah.
And then to have that and then together with them build a new kind of, value driven, entrepreneurs, value driven, businessmen and setting up, the regions and the countries to for a better futures like that. I think it's so fulfilling.
I agree. I think we need more,
Yeah.
even here in the United States.
Mm.
I think purpose is so important, and we don't spend enough time talking about the importance of purpose and values
Mm.
when you start a venture, but also as you grow it, because that's always brought into question all these pulling forces, pulling you in different directions, can take you away from your purpose,
Mhm.
can also sometimes make you say, oh, you know what, maybe I'll turn a blind eye to a certain value I have. These are tough decisions, And when I think about you, because also during the pandemic, you made some really hard choices about partnering with the Indonesian government. And I think a lot of your decisions were very much anchored in your purpose of ensuring that those who are dependent on Grab Indonesia for income were able to continue to have access to that income. And you had to build a strategic partnership and take on the government as an ally. That's something that a lot of emerging market entrepreneurs have to do. But it's not always easy to work with the government, partner with them to chart a new path or a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
So if you're giving advice to a new innovation-driven entrepreneur across global growth markets, could be in Southeast Asia, could be Africa, could be Middle East, could be Latin America. We all have difficult governments to deal with, and not so difficult. I think, it's not as straightforward as people think. I think governments, at least in my country, sometimes the government is extremely difficult, but sometimes that's a huge opportunity to really create change and shift mindsets and create a new opening for new systems to evolve. And I think you did that in Indonesia. So what advice would you have to entrepreneurs on how they can really work with their governments as an ally?
So yes, governments sometimes could be quite difficult to deal with, but I think we don't blame them. I mean, many, especially for the tech startups, many of the things that we do it didn't exist before. So it's hard for them to sometimes to absorb, to understand, let alone to set policy on how
Mm-hmm.
to regulate it. So
Mm-hmm.
don't blame on them on this. So I think number one advice is to build a platform of communications, because you need to communicate. You need to understand what's their way of thinking, and they need to understand also what the reasons that we do things. And mind
How
me,
many hours and
mind
hours
me,
and
it
hours
takes
of time?
years to do that, and then let alone we understand that the time of the government's very, it's difficult to get, but you have to fight for it, because you will need that to be able to serve your purpose. um, Number two, I think my advice is you really need to believe in what you do. When you do ventures, if you don't believe what you do, it's hard to convince people.
Yeah.
You need to do some internalizing yourself as well, making sure that you really do what you believe, and then you believe what you do. Because then it's hard to convince people if you really look so not so believing to what you do, right? And then in between, of course, there will be, arguments, again, agreements, disagreements. That happens.
Yeah.
And I think the guiding light to that is that, again, you look at yourself again. Do you do the things for the right reasons or not? Once you know that you do things for the right reasons, people in the end eventually
We'll come on board.
will come aboard. Whatever the situation is, I found it quite consistent. You need to actually to ask yourself and team first. Do you believe that you do the right for the right reasons? In fact, I told my team several times, if any of you ever doubting that you do things for the right reasons, just come to me directly, and we'll do a discussions, and let's do a debate as well immediately. Because if you don't believe that you do for the right reasons, I cannot actually trust you to talk to other people outside, because then it'll be a wrong message. So once you sorted all of those things, definitely things will be much easier. And I found it like, in the case of Indonesia's, then government is really, really supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of these SMEs going to digitalizations, it's very much supported then. In fact, now they understand the pain points that these small businesses, micro and small businesses, needs to be formalized, giving some kind of like, benefits as well in the process for a bigger purpose, because
Mm-hmm.
then government realized the importance of this small and medium enterprises. So then what happens is that we went on the road shows, to cities, to, remote cities in Indonesia, to Papua, to Sulawesi, to Sumatra. And we did, road shows together. And this is the results of those long engagements, and then believing in what you do and doing it for the right reasons.
I love that. And it kind of brings us back to the original point. If you're an entrepreneur and you see yourself as a vehicle to achieving prosperity in your country, you start to function very differently than if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking, oh, I just need to make money. I need to give money back to my shareholders. And profit becomes your ultimate goal, as opposed to, I think you function very differently when you're thinking, well, profit is important, but the change I can create in my country is more significant as kind of the guiding departure point. You
Mm.
show up differently to different stakeholders in the ecosystem, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that for you, culture is really, really important. I've
Mhm.
seen it live. I've also seen how your team,
Mm.
I've seen how they work together.
Mm.
I've seen how dedicated they are, how open and honest. Um, and, there's always this
Mhm.
debate, what's more important, building culture or strategy?
Mm.
Or is it both? And I know that in your case, building a culture was really, really important for you. And I imagine it was important for you even before you took on this role at Grab, and I
Mm.
imagine it will be important to you long after.
Mhm.
Um, can you share with those listening your thoughts around building a culture in an organization, kind of bottom up,
Mm.
and what is important to you in that culture?
Mm. think it's important, especially when you're in a mission to achieve something and you're facing mountains. It's a steep, way forward. I mentioned this earlier to bringing in like-minded people.
People lie though, Ritzky.
But then it could
I
be
know
tested through time.
I hate to say this, but sometimes people are really good at talking a good talk.
Yeah. So now this is the key. I mean, like people lie during interviews, maybe.
Sure.
Then you onboarding, different kind of, that you thought you onboarding like-minded people, but then it is not.
And what do you do?
Hence, this cultures plays a very important role. Many companies says they have cultures, but it ended up only on posters, on emails, without giving examples. So number one, giving examples is very, very important. You cannot convince team that you live certain values if you only send emails, but you don't be seen, tested to those values. You have to showcase if you face, a tough decisions, but then you choose to actually to live up to your cultures that you have conveyed before. People see examples that you've been, cornered to a certain situations, but then you make tough decisions to defend the cultures and prioritize cultures first. I think that's very important. Examples. And showing examples, I mean, people that will spread and people will really, really convince that you really do live a certain values. Number two is, of course, we jokingly, mentions about interviewing process, but then you found out different people. So again, not just to put, cultures in posters or whatever it is. You really have to actually regularly, assess cultures in the organizations, into the team as well. So it has to be regularly, assessed.
And what do you do when you find somebody who is an outlier? Do you get rid of them?
Number one is, of course, to develop. We give feedbacks. People sometimes.
So you give feedback for
We give
because
feedbacks.
you remember last year when you were here. Yasser Mustafa was here. He says to me, he said, Dina, one of the lessons that I've learned in business and helping other entrepreneurs build businesses over the years is that when somebody shows you through actions that their values don't match the values that are important to the culture you are building, you have to get them out fast. But then I know other people who say you need to give people space to evolve. Where do you stand?
I stand for the second, for the latter. Because I've seen also examples where people changed. We give good. It's actually the purpose as well. I mean, you bring in some like-minded people, but also you try to get people to be like-minded people. Maybe certain people, didn't really, into that values. But once you give examples, you give feedbacks, I've seen people, really, really change. But of course, the first, mindset will also applies at a certain point. You need to have deadlines as well. You cannot, let people,
Slip.
not changing and then dragging too long of a time, because that will drag the organizations.
Yeah.
There'll be tough decisions as well in the end. If it's actually you've given a chance and you've given fair feedbacks and open feedbacks, but not even, you're seeing an effort being given by certain people. You have to make tough decisions.
How do you make those tough decisions?
Once you've gone through those process, it'll be very objectives. You have to be very objective. You cannot be subjective.
No, I get it. But, sometimes making a tough decision when you're a really kind person is hard.
Once it's structured and objectives, even though I'm a kind of personality, the way you said, thank you for labeling me as a kind person, by the way. But then when it's structured, when it's objectives, the reasons, then you convey it objectively. No emotions, nothing. It is just because of it just doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit. Yeah. And how does culture fit with strategy? Because I believe, this is just my interpretation of what I've seen from you, that they're both deeply intertwined. But oftentimes we teach them as separate things. But what is your belief of how culture and strategy really fit together?
I found it actually, many people found it is difficult to find an organizations with like-minded people.
Yeah.
So once you as a different person, not me, people, you found a very fitting organization of like-minded people, honestly, they will tend to be very loyal. They're less about materialistic. Of course, we fight as hard to actually to give, better compensations and things. But they will care less about that. They will be more like, this is an organization that I find it fits in. It's
And I'm
mission
loyal
driven,
to this
and I'm
mission.
loyal to this mission.
I've seen that. Like, obviously Tirza is one of my closest. I've seen how loyal she is. That is not an easy thing to achieve. And I think that's just because of the example that was set and keeping the purpose at the very center, right? So I want to ask you, since this is MIT, right? And MIT is about technology and we're about deep tech too, right? And AI and I would say some of the more advanced technologies right now are starting to proliferate the world. But a lot of emerging markets are really scared of some of these new advanced technologies like AI, digital assets, cryptocurrency. But these new technologies are just tools. And I think that there are a lot of fears right now from governments about what some of these new technologies are going to do in their countries. Are they going to be faced with an even bigger job unemployment crisis, or what should they be doing? So in a country like Indonesia, and I would say thinking more broadly about Southeast Asia, in your mind, how can we better embrace and adopt some of these new advanced technologies to create prosperity? And how can governments start looking at things differently so that some of the entrepreneurs who are really building ventures in this space stay in our countries and don't come here? Yesterday I was in a roundtable discussion about angel investing in the Middle East. And one of the entrepreneurs, he's in biotech. And he left. He left Jordan and he's building his business here. Another one of the entrepreneurs, again, is in biotech. Amazing engineer. Left Egypt and is here in Boston. We want these entrepreneurs to stay in their countries. But yet they feel that they don't have the space to engage in R&D, doing things properly, have the right supportive regulatory environments. I think we need to, even at the Legatum Center, we need to do better at having conversations with policymakers about what some of these technologies mean and what they can actually do to the advancement of our own countries, not just from an economic perspective, but from more of an inclusive prosperity perspective. What are your thoughts on how we can better integrate all of these that are coming? They're coming anyway. There's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
But how is it that we can stay ahead of the curve as opposed to finding ourselves behind the curve?
I think the pattern has been there for long. New technologies, as you mentioned, comes anyway.
Yeah.
It happens in the past. I mean, you wouldn't believe when automobile was first in existence.
Yeah.
In UK,
The ultimate innovation.
Exactly. Back then in UK, there was a so ridiculous policy in anticipations of the automobile that was called, I think, a red flag policy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Red flag regulations. So, this was so funny. So anyone with automobiles, it was not as fast as today, definitely, will need to have two people in front of the automobiles walking.
Yeah.
And then carrying red flags.
Oh my goodness.
You wouldn't believe
That's
it,
how
right?
it started? I did not know that.
And then, of course, as it's become more advanced, they just got rid of that regulations because it become irrelevant.
Yeah.
So, people, don't blame the governments. Even people at that time, act, weirdly, strangely to new things. And now it comes the AI, the large language models, whatever it is. I think the key here is for us to, because nobody knows. I think it's the same like a pandemic. Nobody knows where this will lead to, because it is
which
going so
means
fast.
we need new learning. We need to create space for that learning.
Exactly.
And not be afraid.
Not be afraid. What is very important for us to keep on engaged and learning to each other where this could lead to, and then there will be different triggers to make it differently. It's suddenly because it's like now like big companies like competing in these AIs, so they're kind of like creating new innovations out of it. It could lead to something else that we wouldn't know. And then it is very important for us to discuss together. I mean, like learning together as well, and then seeing from the positive side of it, and many positive side of it, and as much as possible to manage the negative sides of it. I know even educational institutions trying to understand as well how to deal with this. I mean, students as well using AIs to do their assignments and work. But I think the key,
our friend ChatGPT.
yeah, I mean, like it is becoming commonalities right now. I see it.
But these things can be used to create efficiency if we use them properly, and they can be used to create damage.
I know. Even myself now, I tend to use AIs to help me. I don't need so much personal assistance these days. I mean, like just to be honest with you,
yeah,
could help me to actually build at least the core structures, and then I could do my things on my own. It helps me a lot, and I know lots of people being helped a lot by the existence of AIs, but you need people that knows how to use this technology for a good ways.
Well, brings us back to values. Right?
Brings back to values.
Yeah.
And then I think the discussions will have to come back again to values. Whether it is companies, governments, educational institutions, how could we make values as the guiding light to actually
and purpose
and purpose? Definitely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. It's not easy though. So you're the one who brought up purpose again, and because I think purpose is so important, right? And I don't know that we educate students to really think about purpose. Although I think lately at MIT there's been a healthy debate about, are we using science and technology for good, or are we using it not for evil? Because it could be both ways. And I think purpose is what determines which direction you go in. And Ridzki, I've seen you as a CEO. I've seen you as a friend. I've seen you as a father. I've seen you as a husband. Like, I've seen you in your different roles. And I think purpose is really important to you. How is it that you think of purpose and how you navigate all of the different aspects of your life?
Thanks for asking that. I mean, like, maybe it's a process. I'm not becoming what I am just like that. I think it's through process, through decades. Maybe in my younger version of me, I was not even a father, so I didn't know how actually to be a father.
That's right.
And then once you become a father, then you try to think about how you merge your values in your professional lives to be a good father as well. So it's a process. But again, I think it comes back to two things. Number one, doing things for good reasons. It's always been my principles. And as my career grew, I know that I will have more power to do it. So then for me, it is more the purpose to create benefits in a way through what I do to as many as people, actually more people that I could actually be doing to get them benefited from what I do. And then setting example of this to the team member, to my families, and they start to believe in me as well, that I do it for good reasons. That's why you see probably my wife, my kids, they're so keen to actually to be with me.
And proud.
Yeah, because
you can see the look of pride. I looked at your wife in class the other day and I saw pure pride.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful.
Thank you. Because they also believe in me and they also see the impacts that I'm making to many people. And that's where the pride came from.
Absolutely.
Because they know that I do for the right reasons. I do things for the right reasons. Um, I hope I could do my share to show this to the world that there's never been a perfect, situations, but the way that you involve people, that will make people believe in you, and they will do their shares. Once you actually convincing them that it's possible to achieve. So again, it's about, I talked to Mark Elaine earlier as well. I think myself like more like a candle where I just don't, I don't, just light up what's around me. But my purpose is also to light up other candles, as many as possible. So then people could be the examples to the world. And I hope I do my shares of that part. And I really hope that it's successful in a way. I take, not lightly, but I care much less about, material achievements. But I take seriously about how do we make impact and we influence people in a good way to make the world a better world.
And where does your faith fit in? When I think about your example of a candle, I immediately in my mind, I'm Muslim, and the word light, nur, is mentioned so many times in our faith.
Yes.
And for me, the lesson I take from that has always been you have to be a source of light in everything you do, even when you're experiencing loss, deep loss. And I know you have experienced deep loss, and I have experienced deep loss, and you need to find a way to find the light. Entrepreneurs, very difficult journey. It's a very lonely journey when you're building a venture. It's even lonelier when you're building a venture in a very difficult, volatile market. How do you continue to find a way to be a source of light and to continue to also help others hold on to their own light?
So faith is my source of energy.
Yeah.
Definitely. I take seriously, of faith. Because again, I spoke about, believe in what you do and do what you believe. It's actually maybe originating from the faith. So I know that I'm not here in the world, not for a purpose. Everyone has their own roles. And, sometimes people seeing me like, wow, you're quite successful relatively. But I take it as a role instead. This is a role that I am being the responsibility to be in. And I need to be as responsible as possible to show examples. And then I can actually, I can stand before, in the afterlife that I've done my part.
You did your part.
I've done my part and responsibly. And that's the least that I could hope.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think our journeys are so actually very, very short. I always say very long days, very, very short years, extremely short years, and time just flies.
I know.
And in the face of time flying by, you really have to hold on to creating meaning and impact before your time actually ends. So, Ridzki, my last question to you, because I'm a big believer in hope and the need for hope.
Oh.
And we're living really difficult times in the world right now. We have wars. There's climate, climate catastrophes. Southeast Asia is a victim to that. I think there's a lot of struggle right now in the world, and people are really facing a hard time finding their way. But there's also a lot of cause for hope. And, I derive a lot of hope when I hear your story and when I think of what you have done with your life throughout your career journey. And I think wow, Southeast Asia is lucky because they have a great example of an entrepreneur like you and many others. But what are you most hopeful about when it comes to entrepreneurship and innovation in Southeast Asia today?
Um, I think what I'm most hopeful about is that I believe in Southeast Asia. It's a region of 600 million people. Um, what my hope is that, and I believe in it as well. I mean, that in the decade from now, 2 decades from now, the world will see Southeast Asia not just geographical map, geographical locations in the world, but it will become an important players in the global mapping. I know there's so many challenges. There's so many, mountains that we'll have to actually to conquer. However, there's so many opportunities lies there as well. And my hope is that we don't depend on, of course we collaborate, but we don't depend on someone else for our faith in the futures. But I believe that, Southeast Asian people will define the course to be, to play actually a better part and more important role in the global mapping in the future. So many things will happen. I know you mentioned issues about climate, sustainability, tech, education, talent, whatever it is, infrastructures. But I believe that together we could solve that problem and create our own solutions to it as well.
I mean, what a beautiful way to end. If to truly believe that Southeast Asia is on a path to really owning its own destiny, that is a wonderful, very, I think for me, inspiring piece of hope.
You're too kind, Dina.
I wish I was too kind. But, I wish for the same for my region.
Yes.
I think it's time for people across global growth markets to really own their own narrative and to be creating the very solutions to their own problems internally within our own countries. And so I think it's a beautiful message to share with everyone. So I thank you for your time.
Much welcome.
And
thank you as
also
well.
for being who you are and for coming here to share a little piece of your story with everyone else.
I love being here.
We love having you.
Thank you so much. So you. Organization that I